Hey, welcome back, friends. And as we do every Tuesday, we are joining you live for In the Trenches. Our 7 from 77 is coming up in just a little bit. Brian Boesch, as you can see on your screen, is right there. But before we get going, MGoBlue Podcasts. We always like to give you an update, what's going on. Defend the block. The Michigan basketball season is rocking and rolling. It's been a great start to the season. Very exciting start. Post-game episodes after the Oklahoma game on Wednesday night and Purdue-Fort Wayne on Sunday afternoon. And then Conquering Heroes this Thursday. I'm going to sit down before we take a break for the holidays. Conquering Heroes, my guest is going to be Ward Manuel, when we'll get an update on all of the fall and the start of winter sports, how those seasons have gone and are going. And we'll also get an update from the chair of the College Football Playoff Committee, of what that experience was like, and the experience obviously moving forward for football. And obviously there's a lot going on in football, but that's why you're listening to In the Trenches. We talk only football here, and I want to bring in my partner, the voice of Michigan basketball. That's Mr. Brian Boesch. Brian, a man that is traveling everywhere at these times. First of all, happy holidays. And what's it been like on the heels of this Michigan basketball team?
Been fun. 10 games in, two 2-point losses, otherwise a bunch of wins. Yeah, it's been fun. Wednesday night's a big one. Oklahoma's undefeated. It's the last chance to really get a big-time non-conference win. Michigan has a few. They haven't aged as well as you would like, but I think Wednesdays, if they can get it, it would age very well. So, yeah, fingers crossed on that one. But, yeah, down here in Charlotte, bouncing around. But I think I'll be starting to be back into my home office and home studio here after the holidays. We still haven't figured out exactly how the streams will work in the schedule. So, folks with comments, thoughts on it, we're certainly open to it. But we'll keep bringing you these. Maybe not every single Tuesday, but we'll keep them rolling because the response has been really good.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And we do it's a much easier way to get instant feedback, whether it's on X, YouTube, which you can see it on the Michigan Athletics page, but also right here on StreamYard. If you're watching it, the comments come up right directly to us. So it's a great way for us to answer questions in the moment, but also answer questions moving forward.
Yeah, and we tell people, make sure to check out the audio version. We'll have, we do most weeks, we'll have Amir Hall coming up on the audio-only version, which comes out Wednesdays. So we give you a little bit of exclusive on the video, a little bit of exclusive on the audio, and obviously 7 from 77 on both. And let's get our 7 from 77 started with the biggest news since our last podcast, and that's the hiring of Chip Lindsey as offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, replacing Kirk Campbell. Lindsey comes to Ann Arbor from North Carolina, where he was the OC and the QB coach. A pretty fascinating hire, John. Chapel Hill was literally the furthest north that Lindsey had ever coached in his career. And now he's obviously coming pretty far north to the Big Ten, to the Michigan Wolverines. Thoughts on what you think Chip Lindsey can do, what he means for this Michigan offense?
Well, I like the fact that he's got a lot of in routes to a lot of those high schools in the South. He coached high school for about a decade down in the South, started off at Troy, in terms of the college ranks, and has worked his way up at Arizona State, Auburn, another stint at Troy. But I think the biggest one is his time at UCF and North Carolina. When you're talking about major college football, and the fact that he was the guy that last had hands on Drake May. And I know he coached Jarrett Stidham when he was at Auburn. And so you start to look at what type of quarterback coach is he going to be? Is he going to be the guy that can develop, Underwood and be the right guy for him at Michigan? What type of offense? And I like the fact that he is a much more open style of offense. It's still going to be obviously heavily influenced by Sharon Moore and the identity that Michigan football is. But we're kind of in a time right now where that identity, it can shift a little bit. It's always going to be smash mouth football, run the football. But with the transfer portal open and, looking to fill some voids on the offensive line, looking to fill some voids really everywhere on offense, it's an opportunity to reshape this in a way where it gives Chip as many weapons and as many options to call plays as possible.
All right, number 2 on our 7 from 77. We also learned late last week exactly how the Michigan schedule would look in 2025, and it is different. We've talked about it at times here, going from 5 straight home games to start the 2024 season to 6 total home games, and never back-to-back weeks with a home game in 2025. Thoughts, takeaways? I think this is a fascinating schedule because Michigan's looking to bounce back from a tough season. And there are a handful of teams that are trying to do the same. Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State, USC, Wisconsin. I mean, you got some teams where the ranges are wide for what the expectations will be for a lot of the teams that Michigan encounters.
Yeah, and I do like the fact that it's basically alternating home away, home away. There's not any back-to-back home games. There's only one time, and it's right before they play Ohio State, where they have back-to-back away games. And I can't wait to go to Wrigley Field. And obviously I talked about being able to call a game at the Rose Bowl where, I'm not sitting in the seat of Keith Jackson, but I'm in the same press box. And it's the same thing with Harry Carey and so many great moments at Wrigley Field. And to just see, the ivy on the wall and guys playing football on that field, I think it's going to be an unbelievable scene for the players, for the fans. And selfishly, I'm excited to be able to be in that same booth that Harry Carey was in for so many years. So that's the radio nerd in me. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun. The game that I'm most looking forward to, other than Ohio State and making it 5 in a row, is, there's so many really good games on this, but I think it's probably going to Norman and playing against Oklahoma, second game of the season. I've never been there. Got a lot of friends that played at Oklahoma, a lot of guys in the radio business that are there in Oklahoma. And I think it's just going to be a great atmosphere for fans to be able to travel to and witness for themselves, but also for the team and going to Norman, I think is going to be a great experience.
Sharon Moore will certainly have some friends in Norman.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Yes, that's where he played. So I'm gonna ask him, and we get closer to it, right? It's gonna be, hey, where should we eat in Norman, Oklahoma? What is the Blimpie Burger or the Spots or the Pizza Bob's version in Norman?
Forget the or, and say and, right. Yes, multiple.
Yes. Yeah.
Scott asking here on the stream, 2 bye weeks. We talked about this a couple times. When Thanksgiving is late, Labor Day is early. So this will be the second of 2 years we'll have this. It comes up every 5-6 years. So 2026, unless they expand the schedule and make week 0 actually week 1, it'll be back to 1 bye week. But that's why Labor Day is as early as it can be in 2025. It's on September 1st. And then Thanksgiving is the second latest it can be on November 27th. So that's why it's not any big change. It's just kind of how the calendar falls to keep Labor Day and Thanksgiving. All right, number 3 on our 7 from 77. Before we get into the 2025 schedule, 2024 version of the Wolverines getting ready for one more game, ReliaQuest Bowl in Tampa on the 31st. What's the vibe been around the program? Obviously, there's a lot of talk about what's going on with the recruiting class, the transfer portal, all of that. But hey, there's still a football game that we're about 2 weeks away from.
Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting to find out who is actually going to be on the field for the Wolverines. Same with Alabama. And there's a lot of guys that have made a decision to actually play in this game. It's another opportunity to show for the scouts what you can do. It's 2 big brands. And so a lot of people across the country where they might not be watching some of the playoff games, this is one that everybody's going to tune into. So it's an opportunity for those guys that are still on the roster for Michigan. And I know Davis Warren has taken all the snaps at center, and the depth chart has become lighter at that position, as it has for a lot of different positions. So we'll see a lot of young guys, and I'm really excited to watch when a young player comes in. And I'll just take Blake Frazier as an example. And I know he was hurt at different times throughout the year, but he'd be a guy where, he shows up on campus last year. He's an early enrollee, and the weight room, all of those things become his best friend. And we're talking a year later now for a kid that came in at 18, and you're spending a year at training table in the weight room, learning on film, And now I don't know if he's going to play or not, but he's just an example of you've had 1 year in the system. You've had a year of developing, of growth that guys go through when they arrive in college. Now we're going to get a chance to see some of those guys on the field and see what they can do. They don't have to worry about burning their red shirt. They don't have to worry about anything other than just going out there and playing. They don't even have to study. There's no classes going on right now. It is simply football focused. Go out there, have a good time, play against Alabama, and show us what you could do. That's what I'm really excited to see on both sides of the ball, in really every facet of the game, all three phases of getting a look at some of these young guys that it's a preview of what we could see next year.
I just think we've gotten to a point in college football where, when the bowl opt-outs were just starting, there was obviously frustration because it was new, it was different. We all want to see our favorite players for all these teams play in these games, even if, they might be going to the NFL after this. Now, I think we've gotten to a point where, you want to see players play, but it's the embracing of the fact that this is basically, as you mentioned last week, a televised spring game against another team that happens to be, in most cases, in a nice tropical location where, again, that's not ideal. And as we transition to number 4 on our 7 from 77, it looks like one of the stars of the game on either side, Jalen Milroe, as of right now, he's going to play in this game. And I'll tell you, we talk a lot about the Rose Bowl. Obviously, it was one of the best moments in Michigan history. Jalen Milroe, his performance in that game, now it's easy to say because Michigan won the game, but man, he was gritty. He grinded with a relentless pass rush. Milroe still made some plays and had Alabama right there to win the game. And I'm fascinated to see if that does indeed get to the point where he will play in that game. We don't know for certain if he's going to go to the NFL after this year. I think he will, but he hasn't said it yet. It's a unique storyline to add to this because you just assume a lot of these guys aren't going to play. Yet Milroe, I think he looks at this as an opportunity, maybe partly for some redemption, a much modest version of redemption compared to Rose Bowl versus ReliaQuest Bowl. But also, I think he's looking at this as an opportunity to potentially springboard what is a questionable, is the best way to put it, quarterback class in 2025. And maybe he thrusts himself into first round in top 10 consideration.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's any way for him to get into the first round, but I think there is a valid reason for him to play in this game, and that is to improve his draft stock. And whether it's a third round, second round, high second, and who knows, because of that extra year that you get as a first round pick that of team control, that 5th year option, maybe a team will take a flyer on him at 28, 29, 30, something like that. We know it won't be 32 because that's where the Lions are picking, and they've already got Hendon Hooker. And so when you think about what he has to gain from this, and sure, there's always a risk of injury, but he has so much to gain from this. And I love the fact that he's stated to this point that he's playing in the game. He does seem to me to be a little bit of a throwback player where, hey, we're lining up to play. I'm going to play. He can improve his draft stock. And if he ultimately decides that he's not going to go to the NFL this year, that, hey, what he's getting back from the feedback from agents is, you know what, you're a day 2. But if you have another year of development, you could be a day 1. Maybe he ultimately decides that he's going to come back for another year. Who the hell knows? But I love the fact that he's going to play, and it's all there. When I say he's a little bit of a throwback, I got to believe part of it is if this game wasn't Michigan, maybe he doesn't play in this game because of how the year started and losing to Michigan. There is always going to be that in the back of your mind. I hate that we lost to you, and now I can do something about it. Stakes aren't going to be the same. Results aren't going to be the same, but he could do something about it, and I absolutely love that.
I got a lot of respect for him. If it weren't for Jalen Milroe, we don't think of the Rose Bowl the same way as we do. Because if it weren't for Jalen Milroe, Michigan wins that game by a lot. Yep.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and here's the other thing. There's a lot of guys that are making the decision for Michigan that I think could take a tip of the cap from Jalen Milroe, where they could improve their draft stock if they played in another game. Now, again, some of these guys have 3 years of film, 4 years of film, 5 years of film, and it's not going to ultimately be the decision maker. One game isn't going to maybe make that much of a difference, but it's another opportunity.
Yeah, I totally understand why likely first, even likely second round picks don't play in bowl games. But boy, if you're being talked about as a day 3 guy embrace that opportunity to try to get yourself into the third round, late second round. That's a massive difference, not just in financials, but also in the worth that you have in an organization. It's a heck of a lot easier to dump a 6th round pick than it is a 2nd round pick.
Oh, you get the more rounds that you elevate, the more mulligans you get in the NFL. A first rounder is going to get tons of mulligans. Hey, okay, well, a rookie just didn't translate to his game, and we'll see the second year, third year. Well, he's still got it in him, right? If you're a 5th round guy and you don't produce your first year, or you don't show signs of ever producing, you're gone. And it's different. 5th round guys from 3rd round guys, 2nd, obviously 1st. So yeah, every time you elevate in rounds, in picks, you get more mulligans, and you can extend your career. So it should be a factor in making that decision.
Absolutely. Number 5 on our 7 from 77. We know some portal losses, and this is expected. It's part of the nature of college football right now. Not going to go with every player, but just some names that I think are worth bringing up. We don't have to go person by person. Just want to kind of get your thoughts. Alex Orji and Jaden Denegal. Wide receiver Tyler Morris, talk about the Rose Bowl and a great moment that he'll be remembered for forever in Michigan football history. Several offensive linemen, including Dominic Jadis, Raheem Anderson, Andrew Gentry, Tristan Bounds, punter Tommy Doman, who certainly didn't have a great 2024 after a really good 2023, and also local products who didn't really get much run at all, but certainly wishing them all the best. Kicker, punter Adam Samaha, and running back Cole Cabana, someone who I know people were really excited about. Battled some injury issues, hoping that he finds a good place to land. Your thoughts on any of those guys that have entered the portal, some of whom Michigan fans know?
Oh, yeah. And so when you think about guys that are in the portal, and all of these are good kids, I wish them nothing but the best. And I hope that they find a system and a place that benefits them a little bit more. And here's the one thing, when you're coming out as an 18-year-old, right, and you get offered by Michigan, those are hard things to turn down. That opportunity, sometimes it just doesn't work out, whether it's system or development, or it's just a level that you just could never attain. More every year that you're in this game about yourself, your abilities, and where you believe that you fit best. And so I think they're going to make some educated decisions on what's the system I fit best in, what level do I fit best in, and what type of other teammates are going to be around me. Some of it has to do with where I'm from, where do I want to go back to, and where are some of my other buddies playing football at for my last couple of years. So it's all of those things are going to play a factor into where these guys ultimately land. But there's some good players, and obviously, when you're talking about Alex Orji, Jaden Denegal, there's some great athletes in this bunch as well.
All right, number 6 on our 7 from 77. Some All-American honors come out. We know of a few. Not all of them are set yet. Mason Graham, he's so far so good as a first-teamer the entire way. Will Johnson's been on every list. Also seeing kicker Dominic Zavada, Kenneth Grant. We know about Graham and Jansen and Colson Loveland. They're going to be heading off to the NFL. But boy, we don't know yet at the time of this recording, but I think Mason Graham's going to be a unanimous first teamer, it seems like.
Oh, yeah. If anybody doesn't put him on the first team, you need your head checked, because what he did, and even coming out in the draft, this is what you're going to hear about Mason Graham in the draft, is they're going to start comparing him to guys 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, to try and find a comparison of what he could do on the football field versus anybody else. He is a special player, and he's going to be drafted as such. He's going to be highly coveted. And you mentioned the weak draft class in terms of the quarterbacks. Don't be surprised that doesn't play a big factor into how high he is able to go. Some say a defensive tackle, top 10 is about as much as you can expect. But in a weak draft class for quarterbacks, don't be surprised to see him go and talked about in the top 5. Now it's just a matter of who ultimately gets that number 1 overall pick. What do they do with it? Do they trade out of it? Who ultimately covets what Mason Graham can do? But he's certainly going to be a unanimous All-American. I think a couple of the guys that I've got my eye on in regards to haven't made that decision yet is Jay Shaw Barham, and I think he mentioned that he's going to come back. but I don't know if nothing is set in stone until, well after the bowl game. And then Kenneth Grant is still not, decided on what he's going to do. So I think there's a lot of excitement that, maybe these guys will be a part of this defense next year. And if not, I think Kenneth Grant is going to be a first-round pick, but he, could do a lot for himself. Take away that Ohio State game. He already did a lot for himself, but if he wants to be the number one guy off the board, that opportunity presents itself next year, because the number one guy off the board as a defensive lineman is going to be Mason Graham.
Top 10 picks. Who do you think would be a great fit for Mason Graham and Will Johnson if they're both top 10? Right now, Vegas and the Giants are the top 2. You got a bunch of teams at 3 and 11, New England, Jacksonville, Carolina, Cleveland, Tennessee. Jets and Bears are 4 and 10, 8 and 9 right now.
I think if you put him on the same defensive line as Max Crosby, I mean, look out. And I know they need a quarterback, but again, it goes to what quarterback is worth a top 5 pick right now. You put this quarterback class in last year's or in the 21 class. I mean, and you just like, I don't necessarily know that it warrants a 1 overall pick. So I think, if you're looking at, putting him on a defensive line with Max Crosby and paying him a rookie salary while Max is making big money, that's a tough line to scheme against.
Well, and you mentioned the quarterback situation. I think that's why Jalen Milroe might find himself trying to sneak into the back end of that first round, because you can sell me on the upside case of Jalen Milroe. There's a floor, but there's a ceiling too. Mason Graham's floor might be the ceiling. I mean, he's going to shatter that one. Yeah. All right. Before we get to Amir Hall on the audio side, and then on the video side, Fox Sports Michael Cohen for a national perspective on Michigan's win over Ohio State, looking ahead to the CFP, all of that. Just want to get your reaction to a few national topics, starting with the closest Heisman Trophy race in 15 years. Travis Hunter of Colorado eking it out over Ashton Jeanty of Boise State. Do you agree with that? And what were your thoughts on it?
I don't think you could go wrong with either one of those. Honestly, they both had tremendous years, and you look at what Travis Hunter did on both sides of the ball. And I know defensive stats don't necessarily measure up to what Charles did, but offensively, he's, 1,000-yard receiver. What he provided Colorado, it seems clear as a bell as to why he would win the Heisman. And then you look at Ashton Jeanty, and I think the only thing that held Ashton Jeanty back was the level of competition that he played against. And fair or not, I mean, at Boise State, he had one game against Oregon, and we'll see what he does in the playoffs, but they give this word out before you see him play against any of that top defenses. But I think he had an unbelievable year, and I think he's going to be another guy that's going to be highly sought after, especially after we've seen in the NFL this year a return to the rushing attack with what Saquon's done in Philly, what you've seen happen in Baltimore, what we're watching and witnessing right here in Detroit. I think the value of a running back is going to skyrocket, and he's going to be the number one guy, obviously.
It's a great point. Every free agent signing of a big-time running back has seemingly worked. You mentioned Josh Jacobs with the Packers. I mean, he's been tremendous.
Yeah, didn't work against the Lions, but it has been good.
For sure. I think what's cool about the Heisman is that
almost subtle digs.
Oh, I know. No, you're hey, I appreciate your 32 comments. I know there are a lot of Lions fans that are worried about the team being 24th in the draft because of what happened. And there's a lot of adversity, but you're keeping the pride flying. I think it's cool that you think about the regionality of college football right now. And certainly, yes, we are in a spot where it looks like the SEC and the Big Ten are separating. But your top 2 Heisman Trophy candidates played in the Mountain Time Zone. You have Indiana, SMU, Boise State with a bye, Arizona State in the playoff. Some regionality, a lot of different parts of the country are represented in the national conversation. Now, does that mean that one of those teams are going to win the national championship? No, probably not. But you have college football as a conversation in a lot more places, I think, with this format. And based on, hey, it's a one-off. I'm not saying it's going to be this way every year, but that's a good thing.
Well, it is a good thing. And when you look at what NIL and the transfer portal has done, it's spread out talent. And I think as we get further down the road, we talked about it this year in regards to how difficult the SEC was and how tough the top end of the Big Ten was, and you look at the most influential players, a lot of them were transfers. Look at what Indiana did. There's going to be a lot of teams in the Big 12, in the ACC, they're going to try and follow that same model. Hell, Bill Belichick is going to try and follow that exact same model. Who can he get in the transfer portal, and how can he turn that into a pipeline to the NFL? So it's at an era, at a time where you are going to see it, whether it's in every region, every time zone, however you want to talk about it, there's going to be really good football players. And I do think that even though the Big 12 was, and I don't know that they're ever going to be a powerhouse, this year it was by default. They put a team in kind of the same a little bit with the SEC, especially with Clemson beating SMU in the championship game. But I do think that you'll see the top end of those conferences become much better.
I just wish we had home field advantage for the quarters. You'd have a playoff game in Tempe and in Boise. Give me that. That'd be great.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting. Ferris commenting here on the stream, why not wait till after the playoffs to award the Heisman? With the 12-team playoff, would you be in favor of that?
I would be in favor. First, I mean, the whole Heisman voting needs to be revamped. There are people that are voting on that should not be voting on it.
Well, there are people who sometimes vote before the conference championship games,
right.
Which is, and especially in a year like this, is absurd.
There needs to be a time, like you can't send your vote in until a certain time. And I know that there's a minimum right now, but it needs to be extended after the championship game. And I really think that the votes shouldn't be cast until after the national championship game. Or if you don't want to be influenced by a team that just simply wins the national championship and you're looking for the best player on that team, then do it, after the first round of the playoffs, when you've had a chance to see at least 8 of the teams play. You already know what you're going to get in those first 4 teams. I know Boise was one of those that's going to get a bye, so you're not going to see Aston Genty play, or maybe it's after the second round of the playoffs. Whatever it is, like, do it at that time so that maybe it's the weekend after the national championship game, you have the Heisman, reveal, something of that nature. And I do think that it needs to be revamped quite a bit.
You know why the NFL is king? Because they stay relevant and have something to talk about almost every single month, every single week.
Oh yeah.
Make it an event after the fact. That's what's so cool about Army Navy. It's its own weekend. So do that with the Heisman. I mean, I'd watch a Heisman Trophy ceremony. I'd be probably more likely to watch a Heisman Trophy ceremony on February 1st than December 14th.
Yeah, I agree. And when you're thinking about, like the NFL, right? The Super Bowl is second weekend in February. Then all of a sudden, before you're even done talking about the Super Bowl, it's free agency, and then it's the draft, and then it's OTAs and mini camps. And
then it's the schedule release.
Oh,
that's a big topic,
and it's the combine. Like, I mean, you're right. I mean, I've even forgot about it, but we talk about it on a daily basis on the morning show. And that's the beautiful thing about the NFL. I don't know that there's really ever a show that we do, and football is always king, but there isn't a relevant football topic that, the only time that you're kind of scraping for some details, and it is really kind of all-star break, right? For baseball, because camps are over. The only thing you might be talking about is a couple of guys that haven't signed their franchise tender, but you're just simply waiting for training camp to start. So there may be like a 3-week window, and trust me, the NFL will find a way to make something relevant in that 3-week window. I
mean, they're playing a game on Christmas on a Wednesday. They'll find a way.
Which is
games,
awesome.
I should say.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. It saves my Christmas.
Last one here. Any changes to your playoff predictions for round 1? I think you only had Clemson as the lone road team to win. Is that still what you're sticking with?
I mean, I think that would be one. It's a long shot. I get that. And I think that Dabo, given enough time, is going to have his team ready. I think he's still a tremendous coach. The one I'm hoping for the most is obviously, south of here and a little bit east of here. And that is when the Vols show up in Columbus. That would be an unbelievable win. And we gave them the recipe. So please follow.
And I think others gave them the ticket access code, but we digress. All right, that's our 7 from 77 on the audio side. Here's John with Amir Hall. And on the video side, our good friend, Fox Sports Michael Cohen, one of the best writers in the country, joining us, who was in Columbus for certainly an interesting deal. And Michael, always good to see you, my friend. We talked beforehand, and you said that you were going to write about Ryan Day regardless of the result. And certainly many people did not expect that result. So just to start, take us back to your initial reactions and how you were putting together your piece, which folks can find on foxsports.com. It's a great piece about it. And obviously Michigan fans will enjoy some of the commentary and the quotes even a few weeks later.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Always fun to join you for some conversation. Yeah, that was the assignment. My bosses and I decided that with everything going on surrounding Ryan Day and potentially his job security and sort of the stakes of the rivalry and everything, that it made the most sense to write about him, win or lose. If he wins, he gets the monkey off his back, so to speak. If he loses, then it's obviously, the most crippling defeat that he's suffered since he took over that program in 2019. And so I was able to take advantage of the fact that writers are allowed down on the field for the final 5 minutes of the game. So I positioned myself to where as soon as the final buzzer sounded, and at that point I didn't know who was going to win, I was just going to run onto the field and kind of get as close to Ryan Day as possible and then scribble down whatever notes I could and then try and recreate the scene in my column. And so it ended up being a scenario where I was within 3 to 5 feet of him pretty much the whole time as he's having kind of this freeze moment that went viral where this fight breaks out on the field and he's just kind of frozen, doesn't know what to do. He's not breaking it up. He's just standing there. Jack Sawyer is a few feet away from him screaming, and there's players running by him with pepper spray in their eyes, and he's just kind of stuck. And so some of the videos that went viral on Twitter, I'm actually in them because you can see me within a foot or two of Ryan Day. But it was wild. I certainly did not expect the outcome to go that way. And then, his reaction I thought was just so fascinating, just the way it unfolded, that was what I ended up building the column around, was just kind of painting that picture and explaining everything that I saw from a guy that, basically was so stunned that he lost that he just kind of froze and didn't know what to do. It was wild.
You didn't happen to see our sideline reporter down there.
It's in the story.
Yeah, wrestling for the flag, did you?
I did, yeah. That is in the story. I saw Mr. Avant, doing whatever he could to get that flag back. And, look, Jason is great at what he does, but I must say the fact that he was dressed kind of a little bit like he was just going to high school, I think made it look like that's not in any way to suggest he's a poor dresser, but he had his backpack on and everything over his shoulders still. And it looked like he had just, gotten off the bus from 8th period. And I think that's why everyone was assuming he was some sort of manager or staffer or whatever, and not a guy that, played in the NFL. But that's exactly what he was.
Oh man, we are playing this on the pregame show for the Relia Quest Bowl. That is absolutely happening. You're right, though. I mean, most people thought he was a manager. I did want to share, and I put Michael's column in the comments, just the quote from this. And Michael, Michael's as good of a writer as it comes. The scene involving Sawyer unfolded within arm's length of Day, who stood motionless at the 24-yard line as if paralyzed by the disbelief of suffering yet another loss to the team up north. I mean, it really, you were there in 2022, and I talked about this in the immediate aftermath. 2022, that place was jumping. It was loud. It was pretty consistently loud until Donovan Edwards' first of 2 runs. It felt nervous most of that game, outside of, to me, the first series where Davis Warren had one of his best throws on that 3rd and 5 after the bad start of field position, and then the Jack Sawyer interception. Outside of that, it was a very nerve-wracking place, and in a place where there were a lot. I mean, there weren't many Maize and Blue fans in there compared to even 2 years ago.
No, I agree. The Michigan, representation was certainly smaller than it had been in years past. And I think you understand that, given that it wasn't the greatest season for Michigan this year. And I think you looked at the point spread being what it was, around 3 touchdowns, give or take a point or two. And I think fans probably realized, maybe I don't want to spend, a couple $100 for this game when it doesn't seem like we're going to have a great chance to win. So I certainly did not expect this. I thought the rhetoric from Ohio State's players during the week was not necessarily braggadocious, but certainly reflected a little bit more confidence than they had going into past matchups, when they were talking about how, this was going to be, or Ryan Day said that this was going to be like a war. And then the players, some of them were dressed in like camouflage and things during the week. It came across with a little bit more confidence. Now, none of them came out and said, Michigan stinks, we're going to roll, this 21-point spread is exactly what it's going to be. But I just thought that there was a little bit more deference in the last couple of years because they knew that Michigan was, basically just as good as them in the rankings, just as good as them in the win-loss column. Whereas this year, I think they felt like this was their chance to do it. And so the fact that they didn't, I think, caught everyone by surprise. And once that game was close, after the first quarter, I sensed the same tightness that you just described, Brian, in the stands and among the players and everything. And that's when you started to hear some of the chants turn against Ryan Day from the bleachers, and that basically didn't stop until he walked out of the stadium.
What does it mean for both programs moving forward? Obviously, Michigan season's done. Ohio State's still playing, but I'm curious as to what type of mental space the Ohio State players are in, because against everybody else, they're one of the best teams in the country. Against Michigan, they're not. Is there any hangover going into this matchup with Tennessee? And on the flip side, what does it mean for Michigan going forward?
Yeah, so I'll start with Michigan there. I thought it was really smart by Sharon Moore to use that post-game as an opportunity to basically make a recruiting video that every player in the country will see and says, like, if you want to come play for Michigan, this is what you're going to experience. I thought that, in those moments when the emotion runs really hot, the fact that he had the wherewithal to make that statement, which he knows is going to be cut into a video and shared on social media and this and that, I thought that was really smart. And so I think for a team that had a 7-6 or 6-6 season and was, pretty disappointing in terms of what fans expected after the national championship, to end it the way that they did all of a sudden, then to see Sharon go into the hockey game or the basketball game when he was back on campus and see him kind of lauded and revered, it was almost like this one moment flipped the switch from people really having questions about Sharon to all of a sudden saying, well, hey, look, we got Bryce Underwood, we got Sharon Moore, we just beat beat Ohio State for the 4th straight year. Maybe this is fine. And then I think you look at the flip side, and my biggest fascination, John, is sort of what that fan base is going to be like on Saturday night. Because I think if that offense comes out and goes 3-and-out on the first drive, or if they struggle, or if Will Howard throws a pick, I think that place could get really ugly, especially with what you guys alluded to, which was the number of Tennessee fans that seem to have bought tickets. So I kind of do buy into the argument that this Ohio State team perhaps might have been better served if they had gone on the road for the first round of the playoffs, just to get away from that potential toxicity. And what does it mean in the long term? I really don't know. There's going to be so much rebuilding for both of these teams. Michigan obviously loses a ton of quality players to the NFL. Ohio State might lose as many as 18 or 19 of 22 starters. And so I think it's almost going to be such a fresh start that it'll be kind of beneficial for Ohio State. But I do wonder, with as long as Ryan Day stays at the helm, is there going to be this mental element, this mental hurdle that he struggles to get over? Because I think that's very real at this point.
Oh man, John just had a smirk on his face that entire time you were talking, Michael. I mean, that was
I can only imagine what the chants are. I know what they were for us after the game, and I know that, like you said, 3-and-out or a pick, or if they don't start fast, it could really get ugly.
Yeah,
it really could. And I think part of it too is the fact that for whatever reason, Ryan Day and Chip Kelly chose to engage in a game plan offensively that certainly didn't seem to accentuate the places that you would look on paper and say, this is where Ohio State has an advantage. Now, I'm not saying that Michigan secondary couldn't have played the game of its life and played really well, but I think personally I would have wanted to take a lot of deep shots against that secondary and at least see what's going on with Will Jansen off the field and a pair of safeties that were not the starting safeties that you expected at the start of the season, and just make those guys time and again cover deep passes down the field. And if they beat you doing that, if they beat you intercepting those deep passes, tip your hat. But I want to throw the ball to Jeremiah Smith. I want to throw the ball to Emeka Ibuka. I want to throw the ball to Carnell Tate. And I want to use different tempos. And if I do run the ball, maybe I want to stretch Michigan laterally and not run it in between the A and the B gaps all the time. So I just think that if Ohio State comes out slowly and also doesn't seem to have a significantly different game plan than they had against Michigan, then the fan base is going to be like, well, what the heck did we bring Chip Kelly in for? What was the point of this? So I think it's going to be a really fascinating environment. And, again, those scripted first drives can be really, really important to set a tone. And if they can score, I think it'll be huge. And if they don't, I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating matchup. It's why it's prime time on Saturday night. You mentioned how Sharon Moore handled it and the recruiting leverage he utilized from the aftermath of beating Ohio State. What to you has been the national reaction and the national impact of Michigan's recruiting class, and in particular, keeping Bryce Underwood in the state of Michigan?
Yeah, I've been really impressed by the recruiting class. I think there was certainly a point in time partway through, like in the summer, where you looked at this class and you said, what is this? Like, what is this going to be? I don't really know about this. Does he have the right mix for recruiting in terms of guys on the staff that can get it done? And then they obviously closed really, really strong with a bunch of blue chip players over the last 2.5 months of the cycle. Of course, anytime you get to keep Bryce Underwood, that's a massive, massive victory. I think more so than Underwood himself, I think the infrastructure that it took to get that done is what's going to be more important for Michigan in the long run than necessarily Bryce himself. And Bryce could go on and win a national title, and certainly that could be program and landscape tilting as well. But I think this being the wake-up call to get Michigan's NIL to a point where it is now on par with just about any team in the country, and also getting a new benefactor in the Ellison family certainly doesn't hurt if they're going to be one of the richest families in the country and he's willing to fund a lot of this and step up, then that's certainly huge. So I think the structure that they have now with their NIL, the willingness to embrace going out and paying guys rather than just paying the guys that are on the roster, I think you have to do that to win. And I think it's going to make them significantly more competitive in the transfer portal in the coming months. So I think all in all, their recruiting is in an excellent place right now, and I'm fascinated to see how it comes together. But you get a guy like Bryce and what it takes to land him, I just think that speaks really highly of the organization and the infrastructure and the monetary compensation that Michigan has at its disposal right now, which wasn't necessarily the case a year ago, 2 years ago, certainly 3 years ago when NIL just came into the picture.
Well, I mean, that it's huge to be able to show that you can get a recruit like that, flip a recruit like that, and all of those things are great. But now you've got to develop that recruit. You could show that you can recruit the best player in the country, develop him into a national championship quarterback. But probably more importantly for today's kid is you want to be able to develop him into a number one or a top overall draft pick. Chip Lindsey coming in, he's going to have hands-on. I don't know if you've had a chance to speak with him, if you know him at all, interviewed him, but what do you know about Chip Lindsey coming to Michigan?
Yeah, so I haven't spoken with Chip, and I don't know him at all, but I was looking through, his background, obviously, when the hire was announced, and then again this morning getting ready to talk to you guys. And I think you can see some of the data points that probably made him an attractive hire to Sharon Moore. You look at a few different things. One, does he have experience working with a quarterback who has legitimate NFL potential? Yes. Obviously, you look at what he did at North Carolina with Drake May, and that would check off one box there. You look at, does he have experience in an offense that needs to be built around the passing exploits of a quarterback? Again, you go to North Carolina and you check that off and you say yes, because I think it's clear Michigan will need to throw the ball more with Bryce Underwood as its quarterback. Then you look at, does he have experience with some of the best offensive minds who came up with really good run-first schemes? And you look at Gus Malzahn and you say yes, and you look at Todd Monken and you say yes. Does he have head coaching experience? You look at what he did at Troy and you say yes. So I think those are the boxes that probably attracted Sharon Moore to Lindsey when he was looking through the hiring process. Now, I don't think it's necessarily a slam dunk hire yet. I think you could just as easily look at some data points that aren't there and point out some flaws as well. But I think those are probably the primary bullet points that Sharon was looking for. Does he have experience in a run-first system like the one that I want to run? Can he influence me in a pass-first way? And has he worked with great minds? And can he develop a guy that's a surefire NFL prospect? He checks those boxes right now. And so I think that's probably why Sharon Moore was interested in Chip Lindsey.
Oh, that's really interesting. Before we let you go, wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the CFP. First off, you will be probably one of 200, 300 people in the world who will get to do. The only way this would be better is if one of the stops were Michigan, but you will be covering Friday night in South Bend and Saturday night in Columbus, right? So take fans through what that looks like logistically for you to experience.
That's a great weekend.
I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? Like,
that's awesome.
The landmark start of this and the two primetime games. It'll be a busy 48 hours for you, but take fans through what it'll be like from your standpoint and kind of what the logistics are.
Yeah, so it's gonna be a really fun weekend, and honestly, this whole 7 days is gonna be a blast. Saturday night, I was at Madison Square Garden for UConn Gonzaga doing a little college hoops, and then today's Tuesday. Sorry, I'm losing track. Thursday, I'll fly to Indiana, and then Friday is that game. The Indiana State Championship. I think they're dubbing it, between Notre Dame and the Hoosiers. So that'll be a lot of fun. Two teams that have only played twice since 1958, which is kind of crazy considering they're both Division I in-state programs. But yeah, my first time covering a football game at South Bend. I've covered a basketball game there before, but not football. So that's going to be a blast. Then I'll wake up Saturday morning and make the 3.5 or so hour drive to Columbus, and then I'll cover that one, and we'll see how that goes. But that should be a really fascinating double dip where, it could be a really great weekend for the Big Ten. It could be a really disappointing weekend for the Big Ten. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, I am really jacked up to cover those two games in the span of 24 hours. There won't be much sleeping happening, but we can sleep on Sunday and Monday. So it's going to be a good one.
If you need directions to Columbus, let me know. I'll send those to you. But,
it's a little different from South Bend, but I think you could still live. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's still south till you smell it, and trust me, that stench, it goes a long way east until you step in it. You'll be right in Columbus.
Oh man, John, we got the button there. I wish I could just play that recorded. Thoughts on the first round, and I don't know if your bracket predictions are out or if that's a coming thing on Fox Sports, but it's understand. I mean, Oregon was clearly the number one team, the most accomplished team in the country over the course of the first 13 games of the season. But you got to win 3 more. Whoever wins that Ohio State-Tennessee game will be a difficult out in the Rose Bowl. So how do you see this all playing out? Is Oregon to you a prohibitive favorite, a favorite, maybe not even a favorite in your eyes?
I still think Oregon's the favorite. I really like that team, and I think the fact that they're basically going to play a warm weather game at the Rose Bowl, and then everything after that would be on a fast track indoors, I think bodes pretty well for them. So I expect them to make it to the championship game at the very least. I'm very high on Oregon, and I've liked them all season. On the other side of the bracket, boy, with Georgia and their quarterback situation, I just don't know. Had Carson Beck been able to play coming up in a few weeks, I think maybe you look at them and you say, all right, they beat Texas twice. They're in a good spot. But with a UCL injury, it doesn't sound like he's going to be in a great position to contribute, if at all. I think that could be tough for them. So I kind of think that this opens up a little bit for Notre Dame to have a path to make a run toward the title game. I think they're a really good team. I think they're playing really well. I think they could get there, but I still pick Oregon to probably win the whole thing. But yeah, I think it opened up kind of nicely for Notre Dame. And honestly, I know there's going to be a lot of, John will have a reaction to this one too, I'm sure, because of who the head coach is. But Penn State's not going to get a better path to a semifinal. And I don't know if he'll be able to pull it off. But if James Franklin could do it, this would be the year, because I don't think they could ask for much more than SMU and Boise State. That's as good as it gets for them. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I do think Bo Prabula is a big loss for them, and that's a tough one to overcome. But yeah, I'd still pick Oregon to win the whole thing.
It all depends on the number in front of the opponent that Penn State's playing.
Does seeding count for this, John?
What's that?
It's a seed. It's not a ranking. Does that affect things? My column.
We'll find out. I mean, we'll find out. It's been a huge obstacle to this point.
I mean, it will be funny. You think about how all Final Fours are looked at. That obviously you want to win the national championship, but Final Fours are revered. If James Franklin goes win over SMU, win over Boise State, and it gets blown out by what would it be, Georgia or Notre Dame or Indiana, right? Yeah. That side of the bracket, I think it'll probably ring a little bit hollow versus if they went through, if they got through Tennessee and Oregon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. All right, Michael, appreciate your insight as always. Safe travels down to Indiana and then to Columbus. If you need to build that into your GPS, we'll get John on the horn.
You can make it possible.
All right, good stuff with Michael Cohen. Definitely check out. We got the column linked in the comments, and this will be our last stream for 2024. we will keep tabs on everything going on for Michigan football after the holidays, including some more live streams. I'm sure we'll have Michael on during the offseason. Maybe we'll get Michael's basketball thoughts sometime in the winter as well. But for John Jansen and Michael Cohen, I'm Brian Boesch. Thanks as always for following along, and we'll keep you locked and loaded for the ReliaQuest Bowl coming up here in a couple of weeks.